Selected parts from the book My Life Story, written by Sri KJS Dhillon. Part 18. Since the Pulwama incident was a major tragedy and setback for the nation, there was no way that India could take it lying down. Thus, the government of India, in conjunction with all three defense forces, that is, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, along with the intelligence agencies, drafted a plan to hit back, selecting Balakot as the target, which is situated in actual Pakistan and not in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. It has a history of assault and antagonism against India. It was also the site of a major strike during the Sikh War. I quote an excerpt from a Harun Khalid article published on 6 March 2019 in Pakistani daily Dawn.com. Barelvi's religio-political movement needs to be located in its time. In the 19th century, Muslim political power was on the wane as Punjab had fallen to the Sikhs, while the British were slowly spreading through India. Seeing the demise of Muslim power as a result of their lack of religiosity, Barelvi wanted to reassert this political power, which is what brought him to the western boundary of Punjab. Here, in a predominantly Muslim region, he wanted to lead an uprising against local Sikh overlords and eventually make his way into Punjab. A few historians have pointed out that after the Sikhs in Punjab, he wanted to challenge the British. However, he had grossly misread the situation. The local tribal communities betrayed him to the Sikh ruler. He eventually lost his life in the Battle of Balakot in 1831, hundreds of kilometers away from his home, and his movement was crushed by the Sikhs. His philosophy and jihad, though, continued to inspire those who sought the purity of religion. It is not merely a coincidence that on 26 February 2019, when Indian Air Force fighter aircrafts bombarded Balakot in surgical airstrikes, the Indian Air Force chief was Air Chief Marshal B.S. Dhanova. Since it is located in Pakistan territory, India's airstrikes on Balakot were thus a concrete means of conveying a very strong message that India would not hesitate to retaliate right inside Pakistan if Pakistan indulged in any mischief of launching a terrorist attack on India's soil. On the night of 26-27 February 2019, Indian Air Force fighter jets entered POK from Kashmir, flew over the airspace of POK, and proceeded to hit targets inside Pakistan. They attacked a major terrorist camp and installation at Balakot and successfully completed their mission over the Pakistani airspace, returning home without suffering any harm. Pakistan, however, retaliated the next day in the Jammu sector. The famous incident of Group Captain Abhinandan Bartman, an Indian Air Force fighter pilot who was held captive in Pakistan for 60 hours after his aircraft was shot down in an aerial dogfight, also occurred on the same day. Eventually, however, the Pakistani airstrike in the Jammu sector was thwarted, with the Pakistan Air Force suffering disproportionate casualties. The famous statement, well articulated in Commander of Armed Forces Mr. Bajwa's legs were shaking, published in Hindustan Times on 29 October 2020. In the Pakistan Parliament, Ayaz Sadiq, a Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz leader, quoted as said, I remember Shah Mahmud Qureshi was in the meeting which Imran Khan had refused to attend, and the Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, came into the room. His legs were shaking and he was perspiring. Foreign Minister said, for God's sake, let Abhinandan go. India is about to attack Pakistan at 9 p.m. Is now part of history and, of course, inked in the pages of Pakistani parliamentary records. Group Captain Abhinandan Vartman returned home unharmed as Pakistan had to release him in the face of tremendous diplomatic pressure and ignominy at its involvement in the Pulwama attack. You pick up a gun, you are dead unless you surrender. This was not merely a statement made in the press conference of 19 May 2019, but was also followed through in actions on the ground. Many young Kashmiri boys who had joined terrorist outfits were given a chance to return to their mothers and families under Operation Ma, which was very successfully executed by the security forces. More than 50 local youth who had joined the terrorists' tanjeems did return and made a new beginning of life. Notwithstanding humanitarian initiatives like Operation Ma, after the main perpetrators of the Pulwama blast were eliminated within 100 hours of the attack, security forces continued to target the terrorist leadership in the valley in a highly concerted and synergized manner. Consequently, during the first 5 months of 2019 up to 31st May 2019, security forces had gunned down 101 terrorists, including 25 foreign terrorists. Around the same time, that is on 23-24 May 2019, a highly significant incident occurred which bolstered our preparedness and boosted our confidence in terms of maintaining peace and efficiently tackling any terrorist attack in the days to come. This had to do with the neutralization of the notorious terrorist Zakir Musa, who was in the league of Burhan Wani and, like the latter, was also associated with the dreaded terror outfit, the Ansar Ghazwa ul Hind. Our security team had been relentlessly tracking Musa. Incidentally, Musa means mouse in Gurkhali for quite some time and finally managed to run him down following a fierce night-long encounter in Tatsara village in Tral Bowl, hiding inside a feed drum. This was really hot news and was widely covered by all the TV channels and media. His killing, in fact, aroused such intense media interest that press persons kept calling me repeatedly through 23-24 May to inquire about Musa's fate. On our part, however, Musa's killing was not important. as anyone who has picked up a gun has to get killed one day at the hands of the security forces. More than Musa's killing, we were concerned about the maintenance of peace in the valley in the aftermath of the killing. With the entire security team working in synchronization with each other, I was in constant touch with the DGP and IGP Kashmir and the civil administration throughout the night as we coordinated all the aspects of maintaining law and order down to the absolute last detail to avert any repercussion or disturbance such as stone pelting, arson, damage to public or private property, or loss of innocent lives following Musa's death. Our apprehensions were not unjustified, as memories of the violent reactions that had engulfed Kashmir following the death of Burhan Wani at the hands of security forces in 2016 were still fresh in our minds, and this time we tied up all the loose ends noticed during the agitation of 2016. The top brass among the team's security forces, including the army, police, CRPF, intelligence agencies, and civil administration, was thus huddled in an intensive and cohesive planning exercise throughout that night to ensure a clinically synergized operation akin to the one we had launched to hunt down and neutralize the perpetrators of the Pulwama attack 3 months ago. Our efforts paid dividends as we were not only able to complete the operation of neutralizing Musa like clockwork, but also, much to our belief and visualization, when Musa was finally killed on the morning of 24 May, a few people attended his funeral that afternoon, which remained absolutely peaceful despite our decision to refrain from imposing any restrictions on people wishing to attend it. Indeed, the situation was in complete contrast to what was witnessed 3 years ago, and we silently patted our backs, for this was no mean accomplishment. After the funeral, I, along with the DGP, Mr. Dilbag Singh, undertook an aerial survey of the surrounding areas in a helicopter, covering the entire volatile and vulnerable belt, including Sopian, Anantnag, Pulwama, Bandipora, and Kupwara, as also the heavily terrorist infested region of Thrall, the hometown of Musa, and also the place where he was killed. As we flew over the exact locations of Musa's house, funeral place, and the site of the encounter leading to his killing, we could not help but be reassured at the absolute and much desired peace that had prevailed in the entire region, signifying a stark deviation from the past when such incidents had led to incensed reactions from the general public. This time, though, not a single speck of disturbance was visible to us. The interim period between Musa's killing and the government's decision to abrogate Article 370 and 35A around the months of June and July 2019 was marked by intense speculation about the National Democratic Alliance, that is NDA government's next move on Kashmir, especially because it had left no doubt about its intention to abrogate these articles in its election manifesto prior to the May 2019 elections. When the NDA government assumed power at the center for the second time after the polls, the speculation magnified, with questions being raised as to whether both articles or either of them would be abrogated and what would be the fate of the state of J&K, that is, would it continue to remain a single state or would it be bifurcated or trifurcated into two or three states, or would it be converted into a union territory? Such charter dominated social media and the press and was a hot topic of debate in public conversations across the country. In the midst of all this debate and discussion, an infamous statement made in 2017 by a former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir that if Article 35A is tinkered with, there would be no one in Kashmir to hold tricolor was being circulated again. Similarly, incendiary statements were also made by leaders of another major political party in Kashmir. Hence, a lot of heat and dust was replete in the political landscape of Kashmir, and the volatility was slowly but surely building up. To top it all, Home Minister decided to make a crucial 2 day visit to Kashmir around the end of June, ostensibly to take stock of the situation. The timing of his visit was, in fact, particularly strategic as the Sri Amarnath Ji Yatra was scheduled to begin on July 1st. The primary stated objectives of Home Minister were to review the security and other arrangements for the Sri Amarnath Ji Yatra as well as to interact with some key Panchayat leaders, some political leaders and the grassroots functionaries of the Bharatiya Janata Party in Kashmir. However, there was a deep undercurrent to the visit which conveyed the impression that a lot was simmering below the surface, waiting to explode at an opportune moment, and that moment was not far. The high point of Home Minister's visit, already being touted as a precursor to a dramatic announcement, was the occurrence of two high-level meetings in Srinagar on 26 June 2019, which were attended by a veritable who is who of the state administration and security personnel, including the Honorable Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Security Advisor to the Governor, the DGP, senior police officials, members of the intelligence agencies, the Chief Secretary and officers of the Civil Administration, CRPF and PSF, and of course, the General Officer Commanding in Chief of the Army's Northern Command and the General Officer Commanding of 15 Corps, that is me, in effect, the entire star cast of the state security team. Post his review of the security situation, the Home Minister expressed his subtle appreciation of the way the law and order and security were being handled in Kashmir, especially spotlighting the notable synergy between the police forces, intelligence agencies, and the army to maintain law and order in the state. With the political temperature rising and fueling further speculation about what was to come, the above meeting was followed by another late evening meeting of very selected high level attendees, lasting towards the middle of the night, aimed at a more detailed review of the security situation and the possible ramifications of the future government actions, if any. With his schedule chock-a-block with appointments, the next morning the Home Minister was slated to meet the family of a police officer who had made the supreme sacrifice in a terrorist encounter, followed by a few individual engagements before flying back to Delhi. In this backdrop, I was taken by complete surprise when I received a call in the middle of the night at about 2 a.m. informing me of a breakfast meeting with the Home Minister at 7 a.m. This information had barely registered when I got another call an hour later, wherein I was asked my choice of food dishes for breakfast. Still in a stupor, I replied that there was no need to tailor the menu as I would have whatever the others would be served at the meeting, and then dropped the final bombshell. I was told that I would be the only one attending that breakfast meeting, as it was intended to be a one on one duologue between the Home Minister and me. I arrived for the meeting punctually at 7 a.m. sharp. Home Minister was ready for the day's events, and what followed was an hour of intense discussion. A lot of sensitive issues and key points were on the table for a discussion, apart from the delectable food that included aloo paratas and the famous Gujarati dish dhokla during our tete-a-tete. I will not divulge here the exact details discussed for obvious reasons, but it will suffice to say that the issues flagged by Home Minister included the current law and order situation, the potential for it to deteriorate immediately after any declaration by the government, repercussions of the latter on the line of control, and the pros and cons from the perspective of an anticipated Pakistani reaction to the path breaking declaration that was now certain to follow. Ultimately, the Home Minister was seeking my inputs on the likely situation before and after the government action, as well as assurances that the team security forces would be able to handle any situation that may arise in the state post the abrogation, that is, which it was by now clear to me was in the offing. I must point out, and with absolutely objectivity and great professional inputs, that the Home Minister was in absolute control and fully conversant with the meeting agenda, and knew without a doubt the level and extent of the information he was seeking, including some very intrinsic and key issues related to the army and its operations, directly or indirectly concerning the situation in the valley and implications of the heightened infiltration or any other reaction by Pakistan for the army on the line of control post the abrogation. He had obviously done extensive research and homework before organizing this meeting with me, and also had his ear to the ground and was extremely intuitive about the finer details of every issue being discussed. Further, he also touched upon the flashpoints and the possible events that could occur, and more importantly, how we would handle these eventualities. The fact that my experiences during my previous tenures in Kashmir also came up for discussion during that meeting indicated the depth of our discussion in time and space. At one point, when I was asked my frank and personal view, my immediate response was, अगर इतिहास लिखना है तो किसी को इतिहास बनाना पड़ेगा. We can write history only if we make history. His parting words at the conclusion of the meeting, as if doing a final check of my resolve or confidence, were, what is the guarantee that things will remain peaceful? And my honest and confident reply was, I, on my part, give you my personal assurance that the peace will not be disturbed in any way. My confidence was based on the recent experience of the team security forces in handling the events prior to and post Zakir Musa's death, with the entire security outfit acting as a close knit team to prevent any untoward incident in any part of Kashmir. I must say that the Home Minister's knowledge and in depth assessment of the situation, including the likely fallouts, was exceptional, as he had not only covered all bases but was ready with counter plans for every possible eventuality and contingency. The rest, as they say, is history. History was in the making, and here I am writing about it. After this meeting, when I reached home, my wife, who had also been awake the whole night due to the multiple telephone calls I was receiving, asked me, how was the meeting with the Home Minister? My instant response to her query was, 20 युवराज मिलकर भी इस बंदे का मुकाबला नहीं कर सकते. Even 20 crown princes together will not be able to match up to this person. And I was talking in terms of his decision making prowess, analytical ability, and absolute preparedness to handle any situation with guts and gumption. Thereafter, the Home Minister returned to Delhi and we got down to making security arrangements for the Shri Amarnath Ji Yatra, which was scheduled to commence within the next 4 days, that is, on 1st July. The next important event, which took place on 8th July, was the anniversary of the death of the former Hizbul Mujahideen terrorist Burhan Wani, and maintaining peace on that day was an inexorable challenge for us in view of the chaos and violence that had followed the actual death of Burhan Wani in 2016. Since the Shri Amarnath Ji Yatra was in progress, I received a message through staff channels a day before Burhan Wani's death anniversary, that is on July 7, that all the movements of the convoys of the security forces and the vehicular movement for the Yatra would be suspended for a day on 8 July to prevent any possible terrorist initiated incident on this day. When my staff conveyed this message to me, my candid and unambivalent response was that none of these activities, neither the army convoy movement nor the movement of vehicles of the Shri Amarnath Ji Yatris, would be suspended for even a minute, leave alone a day, notwithstanding the anticipation of any untoward incident, as the security forces were fully prepared to take any terrorist action head on. My declaration must have raised a few heckles and must have been discussed with some trepidation by the local police, among others. As soon thereafter, I received a call from the senior police officers urging me to revisit my decision. The decision was in absolute good faith and stemmed from the fact that all such activities were suspended every year on the anniversary of the elimination of Burhan Wani to prevent any public outrage or unrest and damage to public property like buses and vehicles and risk to people's lives, especially the Yatris, and that we should follow this precedent this year too. I was, however, adamant about my decision and determined to deviate from the norm this year. While the police and civil administration had their genuine concerns about the maintenance of law and order, my intent stemmed from the information I had based on my discussion with the Home Minister narrated above. On my part, I was insisting on ensuring the normal conduct of all activities, as this would be another dry run of preparing for the actual challenge of ensuring peace and normality as and when the abrogation took place, which was most likely in the not too distant future. Moreover, in case anything untoward, though highly unlikely, occurred on 8 July, it would enable us to tie up all the loose ends well in time and strengthen our security grid even more stringently on the ground before the abrogation actually happened. Since almost everyone in the police and civil administration were not in the know of the things to come, they were a little unenthusiastic and skeptical about my plan and decided to escalate the issue, referring it to Delhi and informing the latter that they were in favor of suspending the yatra, but the army was in favor of continuing with it. Being fully aware of the security grid and its effectiveness in meeting any challenge, the unambiguous response from Delhi was that the yatra should continue. Delhi and I were obviously on the same pace. Thus, the yatra continued on 8 July as usual with the traditional fervor of Mahadev's blessings, with more than 1,000 odd vehicles of yatris plying that day, and so did the movement of the security forces convoys. I can say with some pride and satisfaction that not a single violent or unpleasant incident occurred on the day. Thus, our plan was not merely to ensure peace on the day of the abrogation, but to prepare a long term strategy, including devising counter terrorist mind games to be able to preempt any risk and maintain peace. We, the team security forces, were in effect building on our assets and our resources in an absolutely synergized manner so that nothing would go wrong on the purported day. It is pertinent to mention here that only a select few in the security apparatus and administration knew of the things to come. I, on my part, can say that though we were gearing up to deal with any situation, no one under my command in our Chinar course was made aware of it, and that is the reason even Pakistan was taken by total surprise, and so were some potential troublemakers within the country. In the meantime, towards the end of July, a very authentic intelligence input was received about an impending attack on the Yatra by terrorists. Initially, since we were keen to refrain from creating any panic, we did subtle checks and searches, but the intelligence kept building up and a lot of chatter continued to be intercepted by the intelligence agencies that a major terrorist attack or multiple strikes on the Yatris were imminent. Subsequently, after our intensive search operations on the morning of 2nd August, the search parties found some portents of the potential attack along the routes of Yatra, including a few prepared improvised explosive devices, that is IEDs, and an M24 American automatic rifle, and most importantly, a Pakistan Ordnance Factory manufactured Claymore mine with the markings of a Pakistani Ordnance Factory, including the catalog part number and manufacturing date. Such a Claymore mine is usually victim activated by a booby trapped tripwire which would throw up hundreds of small steel balls and splinters in an arc of 60 degrees in the direction of the victim up to a distance of 100 meters or more depending upon the type of mine, causing intense damage and injury to people within its arc. We therefore immediately organized a press conference after recovering the IEDs, rifle, and claymore mine, wherein the DGP and I informed the media of our recoveries, with the weapon and actual mine having been airlifted from the place of recovery and displayed live before the media persons at the press conference. Since we had the complete data as to the number of yatris at each specific point and the halting and staging areas along the route of the yatra, we had ensured that all security arrangements were in place to deal with any unusual or perilous incident, including a possible aerial rescue of the yatris using helicopters. As a precautionary measure, the government decided to call off the yatra just an hour after our press conference. Our next challenge, however, was to ensure the safe exit of all the yatris, including both domestic and foreign tourists. Fortunately, none of this was needed as the situation remained absolutely peaceful and under control. Here is an important characteristic related to the Amarnath Yatra of 2019, which primarily is an annual pilgrimage undertaken by people who profess the Hindu faith. Although people from other religions and a lot of foreigners also traverse this yatra mainly for the divine experience, the yatra is predominantly associated with the Hindu religion. As mentioned earlier, I myself have paid obeisance at the holy cave on 59 occasions. Intriguingly and quite aptly for the canvas of India in 2019, the people in the top hierarchy who were connected with ensuring security and maintenance of peace during the yatra that year, in addition to many other officers at different levels, included the following: Lieutenant General Ranbir Singh, Northern Army Commander; Lieutenant General K.J.S. Dhillon, Corps Commander, that is me; Major General Johnson Matthew, General Officer Commanding Victor Force; Brigadier S.A. Usman, the Brigade Commander in charge of the security of the Yatra; Mr. Dilbag Singh, DJP J&K Police; Mr. Munir Ahmad Khan, Additional DJP Law and Order; Mr. Zulfikar Hassan, Additional DJP CRPF; Mr. Bashir Ahmad Khan, the Divisional Commissioner; and Mr. Ravideep Singh Sahi, IGP CRPF of Kashmir Zone. Four of them were Sikhs, four of them Muslims, and one of them belonged to the Christian faith. This is a true indicator of the unity in diversity that characterizes India and aptly showcases India as a guldasta or a bouquet of flowers of different fragrances. This was also the team that ensured peace during the entire year of the 2019. Another incident related to the Amarnath Yatra occurred on 1st July 2019 when I had gone to the holy cave for performing the Pratham Puja, that is, first prayer, accompanied by the then Honorable Governor of J&K. This Pratham Puja is performed as a ritual by the Governor and the Corps Commander in addition to others on the first day of the Yatra every year. Since I had reached a little early and was checking the security arrangements and meeting personnel from various forces, I came across a dog which stood on its hind legs in front of me. When I asked the handler what this dog was doing, he told me that Maneka, that is, as the dog was named, was saluting me. Deeply impressed by Maneka's antics, and as per army tradition, every salute must be returned with a crisp salute, I went down on my knees and saluted Maneka back. Meanwhile, my ADC, Captain Sandeep Singh, clicked a picture of me saluting the dog, and soon after this photograph went viral on social media. So much so that a US magazine contacted me requesting permission to publish this photograph in the context of an article on wildlife or nature and asking for the name that should be credited for taking the picture. I gave them the name of Sandeep Singh. This episode indicates how in the army we treat every life with deep respect. Meanwhile, apart from its political implications, the abrogation also necessitated detailed logistical planning at several levels. As a corps commander who had such a large force of troops deployed on the line of control, which would be laden with snow in December, I was absolutely responsible for organizing the storage of rations for these troops for winter, which starts where the snow melts and continues till the snowfall at higher reaches, which is around October or November, that is the period which exactly coincided with the abrogation. Ironically, I was the senior most officer in Kashmir when the abrogation was declared, and no one else in my course had the slightest prior inkling of it, not even my general officers commanding or the staff of course headquarters. As a contingency measure, I undertook an exercise to complete the stocking of rations for the forward areas much in advance to ensure its completion by 31st July so that it would not be affected by any potential disruptions of vehicular movements subsequent to the abrogation due to incidents of stone pelting or mob violence. However, I conducted this entire exercise by mobilizing our vehicles and resources without arousing any suspicion among my staff or outsiders about the future plan. In fact, when the announcement of the abrogation was actually made after being ratified in both houses of parliament on 5th August, both my brigadier, Army Service Corps, and the sub area commander who are responsible for stocking of rations came to me and told me that the logistics exercise was a blessing in disguise, little knowing that it was actually a planned and deliberate operation to forestall any eventuality that would adversely affect the stocking of rations post the abrogation. Maintaining the secrecy of the impending government decision, as and when it would be, was the main precondition without compromising on the preparations. Chinar House, that is, official residence of the Chinar Corps commander inside Badami Bagh cantonment, was thus considered to be the most secure place where all those who knew it used to assemble and discuss many details to the last bit threadbare. Not even a shred of paper went out of the four walls of Chinara House, full of confidence that we could handle the situation peacefully due to all the experiences of the recent past and the preparations that went into it. We were at the cusp of being part of history and all set for the big day now. Thanks for listening.